Welcome, friends, to the Earth Keepers podcast. I'm Forrest Inslee, inviting you to explore more creation-centered ways of thinking and being, and deeper connections to our places. As you know, we talk a lot about our relationship to creation in this podcast. When we nurture our relationships to the natural world, we inevitably become better Earth Keepers in the long run. People take care of what they love. At the same time, when we deepen our connections to our ecologies, we also become more of our true selves, since we're inherently made to live in interdependent relationship with the whole community of creation. In this episode, my friend Jason Lyle and I will be talking with Mark Warren about the work that he does to help people learn about nature and outdoor survival skills. Mark is an author of many books, including novels and practical nonfiction books about living in and with nature. He also runs a school in the mountains of the state of Georgia called Medicine Bow Wilderness School, where people come to learn skills like fire building, shelter construction, and identifying wild plants for medicinal use. As Mark explains in this conversation, the deepest goal behind all of the teaching he does is to help people discover their own unique relationship with nature. Here then is our conversation with Mark Warren. Well, welcome to the podcast, Mark and Jason. I'm looking forward to this conversation, in part because any chance I get to spend with Jason is time well spent, but also in part because I've really found inspiration and wisdom from Mark, mostly through his books, but also through hearing about Mark from Jason. So I really think our listeners will as well. Jason, I want to start with you and say thanks for co-hosting with me today. You've been on the podcast a couple of times in the past, and I have to tell you that the episode that you and I put out earlier this year really resonated with folks. Maybe you could tell us a bit about what you're up to these days and maybe even give us a preview of the book that you've been working on.
Yeah, so I've been working on the book for about 3 years now, and it's coming down to an end. I actually broke down and hired a good editor out of California, and so we got a lot of the structure put together. And other than that, man, just coaching, and have about 6 or 7 guys that I'm coaching right now. I've got a men's retreat coming up here, and that's less than a month, I believe, we're coming up on, and just come off a busy fundraising time, a lot of hiking trips in the fall. I did a big trip to Colorado elk hunting, took a group of guys out there. So just continue to grow the community of adventures and recovery and coach men and help men find their way in the midst of a lot of uncertainty for men right now. Men really struggle. We're a bit of a, I don't want to be cliche and say a dying breed, but we had kind of a run here for a while where I think men are struggling to figure out exactly what they are supposed to be in the midst of, well, am I toxic? Am I not toxic? Is it okay to be masculine? Is it not okay to be masculine? People get this view of men off in the woods with an axe and a chainsaw hacking at wood and, grunting. But really, men get out in the woods and they open up and they're able to get vulnerable and start talking about the things that matter in life. And it's a beautiful process to be a part of, and I'm honored to have it as my career.
Well, I'm definitely looking forward to reading the book. Jason, since you know Mark and consider him a mentor of sorts, I wonder if you could introduce him today for us.
Yeah, so Mark Warren runs Medicine Bow School here in Dahlonega, and he is a survival teacher, but he's much more than that to me. He is an amazing friend. We grew up, he was in College Park, I'm in East Point, so those are 5 or 6 miles from each other, I would imagine. But we both share a love for the woods, a love for the outdoors. I think the thing that struck me the most with Mark, I met him through a traditional archery class. He's an accomplished archer, an accomplished survivalist, a canoeist. Is that how you say that word, canoeist? Mm-hmm. And so I read Two Winters in a Teepee, and this whole time I'm reading Two Winters in a Teepee, which, by the way, if you listen to this, you need to just get a copy. I probably bought 25 copies of that book and sent it to people. When I met him for the first time, the thing that struck me the most was the relationship that he has with creation. It's not something that he contrives. He doesn't wear the obligatory clothes or carry the obligatory knife from the company he's sponsored by. He lives on 35 acres that are his, and his relationship to that 35 acres is obvious and it's beautiful. And He's an amazing teacher. I've taken several classes with him. I took an axe throwing class with him. And the funny thing is, I'd never throw an axe, but every time I go with friends to one of these things that you go to throw axes at, I always beat everybody because he's an amazing teacher. Everything he's taught me sticks with me. I remember the plant identification, the medicines, and it's because of his relationship. He doesn't just have knowledge. He's actually put that knowledge into his body, and he moves through the land in a way that it's obvious that he's become a part of it, and it's a very beautiful thing. So that's my take on Mark Warren.
Well, Mark, I wonder if you could tell us about your current commitments and investments of time these days.
Well, I'm continuing to teach my classes. I wouldn't call myself a survivalist. I do teach the survival skills of the Native Americans, and of course here that was the Cherokee. I'm not someone who stockpiles anything or teaches that the apocalypse is coming and you'd better get your skills while you can. There may be some truth to that, but my angle to it is actually kind of a hidden one, and that is that I'm really wanting to teach about the relationships between people and nature. I don't usually say those words in classes, but that's really my agenda because it's what's lacking now. It used to be that every person in this area, every single person, had a very close relationship to their environment. They knew where everything came from. They made things with materials that they'd gathered from certain plants or animals. So there were no barriers there to prevent people from seeing what was the gift. Today, there's just barriers everywhere. Kids, for example, have no clue where things come from. Even though they might know academically that a piece of hamburger meat does come eventually from a cow, their thought process is that it really comes from that refrigerated area of the store. Styrofoam tray with plastic wrapping on top. And they never truly relate that to the cow unless pressed. So it's taking things for granted. And the reason that that's a big deal to me is because if people don't see the forest around them or the field or the stream as a series of gifts, then why would they ever want to protect it if they didn't see that, if they didn't have that connection? I'm really after the idea of creating more conservationists. And as far as an investment of time, writing is probably my number one thrust now. I enjoy it so much, and I've always been a writer since I was a little kid. I even published my own books because if you fold the paper and call it a book, it's published. But I went a little farther and bound mine with yarn so that it didn't fall apart. But I love writing. I love what writing does to you as a person. The writer's eye is what I always think about, how you see things because you're a writer and you're probably going to use that at some point. Those are my two big areas, the writing and teaching.
I wonder if you could, for our listeners, just talk about the kind of writing you do, or kinds plural, that is.
Well, if you could say you're meant to be something, I was probably meant to be a novelist. So that's what I really enjoy. But I love history so much that I have very securely fallen into the niche of historical fiction. I love telling the truth of history, but in an expanded way where I can flesh out people and create conversations that we know happened, but we don't really know what the words were. A novelist can do that. So that I've enjoyed very much. My nonfiction work is mostly about teaching. So I've tried to get down my teaching career onto paper so that people can use it, not just to learn themselves, but to learn how to teach it to others. So my 4 books called Secrets of the Forest have the primary goal of helping teachers, parents, grandparents, scout leaders, park rangers, etc., know how to get across a lesson in a fun way, in an adventurous way.
So I read so far volume 1 of your book, Wild Plants and Survival Lore, Secrets of the Forest. And despite the title, I was struck by the fact that it was so much more than just survival information, but really seemed to focus on encouraging this deep and detailed understanding of ecosystems that you're describing and helping readers to understand the myriad component parts of an ecosystem. You talked about teaching teachers to teach. I will also say that it was just very accessible, as I was imagining it, to younger folks as well. The way that you're teaching, even through the book, very hands-on, very experiential, very engagement-oriented. I actually have a notebook now, and I'm following along in the book, learning how to draw leaves so that I can learn the different kinds of leaves and going out to observe the leaves on the place that I live. So I just found it so engaging as a learning process. Maybe you could talk more about this promotion of systemic understanding of the wild. What does it actually do to people when they become more aware of the beautiful complexity of the places that they live in?
There's a profound change that happens, and to describe it to someone who's not crossed that line yet may be difficult, but I'll give it a shot. When you are aware that the plants around you have an awareness, and we know this now scientifically. I'm not saying that plants have brains, but they have so many similarities to us, and it's now been shown that because we as humans put out chemicals from our bodies called pheromones, and all the plants and all the animals do the very same thing. There's an exchange, a communication that happens, and we have lost our sensitivities to it as humans in our culture. I say we, meaning, for example, America, because there's probably some people somewhere who still are very much connected, such as Australia, Borneo, maybe in Malaysia, where the kinds of instincts still exist naturally. We've lost most of our instincts toward nature. And the only way that I know to get back to them is to first learn what's around us academically. And that process is simply an introduction to thousands of friends who are giving you gifts all the time. It's so trite to say to somebody, well, don't you realize the green plants are making oxygen for us and they're capturing energy on the planet from sunlight, something that our bodies can't do. So they are serving as our agents to do this. Everyone knows this in a sense, maybe on a head level. They know it academically, but they don't know it from the heart. And this is where that big change comes about. When you begin to realize the profundity of what we depend on, just from the plant world, to think that every motion that we make, my mouth moving as I talk, my eyelids blinking, or earlier today when I was climbing up a real steep mountain, all of that energy originated in a star that we call the sun. And we get it on this planet simply because this one little sliver of light that hits planet Earth is full of energy. And the green plants capture it here for us. To me, that's profound. And I believe that the people who lived here, the Cherokees, knew this on some level, an instinctual level, because anthropologists now know that all of our ancestors from long ago in paleo times, all of them were born with all of this knowledge, which is the stuff that I teach, the stuff that I had to learn academically. I wasn't born with it. But they were born with that. And so they're also born with that relationship that can't be denied. And we have moved away from that. And what we're told by anthropologists is that the key factor in creating that distance from us to nature is the development of language. We tend to be able to sum things up with words so that we stop experiencing things. Here's a simple example. The typical American pose of a student of mine in a first class at my place, looking at a plant, is I'm on the ground on my hands and knees talking about the plant. They're standing up with their hands in their pockets. And they're making assumptions about the plant. They look at it and they can maybe see if it's fuzzy or not, a presence or lack of hairs. They can probably see that it's got a stoutness to it by its erectness, or perhaps it's a trailing vine that's more succulent. they see these things and they sum them up with words in their mind. So there's the language working. All of that prevents the person from getting down where I am to look at the plant from there and think about it, being on your knees and what that can symbolize. But just the closeness of being there and experiencing on its level is such a different thing than a person standing up, just looking at a plant and summing it up in their mind.
I'm going to pick up on something you just said that is really intriguing me, and that is this idea that we're actually born into relationship. Whether we know it or not, we inherently are related to the systems and ecologies around us, which makes your work a work of recovery, of helping us get back to our true selves in a way. Would you put it that way?
Yeah, I would. Because the more that our culture separates us from nature and the less we see where true sources are, we're put into this isolation room in a way, and we are just visitors. If we just step into the backyard from the lawn into the trees, just for a moment, we're just visitors. And that's an unknown world to most people. And because it's unknown, that also brings along fear. I'm thinking right now about many parents that I've dealt with who have great fears about their children going into nature because they don't know nature. And they were brought up that way. So, yeah, it's very much like being in an isolation chamber, and I'm trying to tear down those walls.
It's the reverse of like people say, I'm going to go out into nature. And I'll say, well, you actually are nature. You're really going out into you. When I take men out for the first time on a hiking trip, it's pretty amazing how quickly they revert back to being a little boy. I'll see grown men with their pants legs rolled up in the creek looking for crawdads, or walking in the woods going, Jason, can I eat this one? Jason, can I eat this one? Jason, and show them sourwood for the first time, and they're all walking around with a mouth packed full of sourwood like chewing tobacco. But they're learning that relationship back to the outdoors is actually where they belong. When I was a pastor, there was a guy named Mark Eldridge. He wrote a book called Wild at Heart. And the entire premise of that book was that men are wired for adventure. We are wired to be outside. We are wired to live these lives of harsh environments and being in the mountains and doing hard things. That book gave me permission to go back into the woods, and I picked hunting back up and fishing back up and going out hiking again. I found Medicine Bow School and then read Mark's book, Two Winters in a Teepee. And the thing about Two Winters in a Teepee is it is a story of a man who is in transition. Mark had a vision. He had a dream. He knew what he wanted. And in one house fire loses everything and decides, that's okay. I'm good with that. I'm going to go and forge the life that I want out of what the land hands me back. But to read that book really helped me see who Mark was and really helped me see who I wanted to be. Now, I don't live like Mark lives. I've not forged that life for myself, but it is the book that probably segued me toward going, I can do a lot more with a lot less. And I bet I bought and sent that book to 25 or 30 people because the story of it really gets down into the heart of what I think most men really desire. And that is this connection to the earth, dirty hands and a purpose.
I have read this book too, and I confess that I kind of geeked out on the hyper-practical details about how you face the challenges of living off the grid, how you made a life for yourself in the wild. I love that stuff. But for me, there was this disarming shift in the really pragmatic tone of the book when you described an experience that I would even call sacred, and which moved me deeply. And that, of course, is the story of the raccoon. I wonder if you could tell that story and talk about its significance to you as well.
Let me start by talking about one of the skills that I teach. It's called stalking, because this is a big part of this story. Stalking is a skill that was forced upon all of the eastern tribes of America, because these tribes lived in what we call the Great Eastern Woodland. This is a thick forest here, unless it's been manipulated by people somehow. Our forest is a complicated one. And because hunting was an absolute necessity, it created a problem with projectiles. You don't often have a long distance, or as an archer would call it, a window through which to shoot a long distance in a forest. You've got too many things to deflect your arrow. So you're forced in that situation to decrease the distance between hunter and prey. There are different ways to do that. You can call prey to you with sound, with visual things, with smells. But the most proactive way of doing it is for the hunter, him or herself, to move forward at an incredibly slow rate, which is very, very demanding. It's like a martial art. Imagine Tai Chi toned down to about 1/10 of its speed, something like that. Your entire body moving like that for hours. And when you get into stalking, you don't have to be a hunter to do this. But that is, to me, one of the greatest doorways through which a person can go and walk into this understanding of the creation, because you become a participant. Even though you may have no dramatic interaction that day with an animal, just because of the way that you're moving through the forest, and you are no longer the interrupter, that you're no longer the interloper, you are part of it, it changes something in you. This is, in fact, a class that I recommend to people who come to me and say, somehow I feel this kind of abstract loss in my life. I don't feel close to nature. What should I do? And I always recommend two things. Get into plant study, because plants don't run away from you, and start learning how to stalk. It puts you into that world where you become an integral part of it. So much of my wandering around from the tipi was stalking. And if not stalking, at least a very decreased speed exploration. I'm always moving quietly. But in my moving around the tipi, I had encountered this raccoon a couple of times. And the last time that I had encountered him, I had my bow. I was out shooting at targets like shadows and colorful leaves on the ground, old stumps, things like that. I really enjoy that kind of wandering. So I had my bow in my hand, and I was coming back to my teepee, and I looked up in this tall sourwood tree, and there he was. He was a real big raccoon. So I figured he was old, and he just peeped up and looked at me, and I stopped and looked at him, and we did that for so long that I finally just spoke to him and said, you don't have to worry about me. I'm not a hunter any longer, but you do need to look out for people like me. So we had a one-sided conversation, and who knows what happens when you participate in something like that. The tone of my voice probably communicated something. Obviously, the raccoon had not had English lessons and couldn't tell exactly what I said, but I would imagine there was some kind of exchange there. And as I moved on, I spoke quietly to him and said something like, see you next time. Don't worry about me. I'm just out here living with you. And the next time that I saw him, it was an extremely cold night, and the wind was harsh and pushing against the teepee door. I was as cozy as could be with my fire inside the teepee. And I saw the wind causing the door flap to kind of bulge inward. But then it started scratching, and I wondered, has a limb flown out there, and is it scratching on the canvas? So I got out of bed and went over to the door and opened it up, and there he was, just standing there in my doorway. And there's about an 8-inch little flange that you have to step over to go into the teepee, and he just walked right over it slowly. Came right around inside to my fire and just stood there. And I thought probably this was such an extremely cold night. And I thought maybe with his age, this is just too much for him. But I felt so honored that he would come to my teepee, and kind of in disbelief that would happen. But when he was shivering, I had a towel there, and I wrapped him in the towel and lifted him up, and he allowed me to do that, and put him where he would get the heat coming off my reflector stone, which is on the back side of my fire. So I got back in my bed, I put my hand on him and just had my hand on his ribs as I went to sleep again. And in the morning when I woke up, he had passed away. He was still right there, but was gone. So I'm sure there's a lot of things you could say about that, but none of it can we ever really know. But I just know that it was a very moving night for me, and one that made me feel honored to be part of that, and to think that there was some kind of a passageway from his wildness to my humanness just still kind of blows me away. Think about that.
Yeah, I'm usually really skeptical about the sentimental stories that you hear these days about people, quote unquote, rescuing wild animals, or they'll rescue a bumblebee and the bumblebee will fall in love with them. It's just like projecting anthropocentric needs and assumptions onto nature. I think that's more distancing than anything. False assumptions about our relationship with nature. This, of course, is not that at all. And I wonder if you could just say more about your understanding of the relationship between human beings and what we call more than human beings. Maybe of the way that people are meant to engage and take part in the ecologies of their places with other beings in the system.
I do believe that there is something that all of us have called atavism, atavism. It's a word that I really love. And it is a scientific thing. It's a remnant of our ancestors left over in us. It's somehow passed down through the genes. It's probably why when a school bus arrives at my place and kids pile out of the bus in my gravel parking lot, all the little boys immediately pick up the gravel and start slinging it out into the woods trying to hit a target. That's atavism at work. That's the hunter coming out. So who knows what happens when we do start devoting time to creating a relationship with nature. We've got that atavistic part in us that's kind of waiting for us to start engaging it again. I think a lot of things are meant to be mysteries. If this was a conversation we were having about religion, I would be using the word mystery so many times, I know. And the native people called the Creator the Great Mystery, and the world itself was the Great Mystery. The most complicated thing on this planet is the science that we call ecology. Most people, I believe, don't understand what that word means. Ecology got lumped into the same category as conservation for a long time, and people thought that ecology was about cleaning up and being thoughtful about the environment. Ecology exists without us. It's how everything nature interacts, and it's so incredibly complicated that it probably scares people. Parents who are asked questions by their children, and the parents have to say, I don't know. And a parent can only do that so many times, before they start losing face. And basically what they're saying is, look, I'm up against this science of ecology, and it's too much for me. And that's true. It is. It's too much for all of us. You get people in science who specialize in this and that, but all of it together is ecology and how it all interacts. But maybe there's a part of us that's come all the way from our ancestors. And keep in mind, I'm talking about all of us. You don't have to be part Native American to make these kinds of claims about your ancestry. We all have ancestors who chipped stone into sharp edges and wrapped that onto a wooden haft and stalked and hunted. We all have ancestors who did that. So we're all common in that way. The Native American people just did it more recently. That clash of the European mindset coming across the ocean and encountering the native people mindset. That's one of the most important interactions that's happened on this planet and on our continent especially. Of course, there's a lot of sad things to say about it, the way we handle it, and the way we've covered up a lot of it. But the thing is, when you get right down to it, those European people who had developed this different kind of mindset, they came from those roots too. But they didn't recognize it as something of value, unfortunately.
Our listeners probably are wondering, what does this mean for me? If in fact we're talking about restoration of relationship, maybe even recovery of true identity that has always belonged to us, but maybe was more engaged in our past, what do you tell people who want to make steps toward change in terms of their relationship to nature?
Well, those two things that I mentioned earlier that I consider to be doorways into this. And number one is the easiest one to do in terms of physicality is getting interested in understanding plants. What are they? Which plants are they? What chemistry do they have? What practical application do they have? What medicine? What food? It's not an easy academic subject. It's one that I went at in a rather autodidactic way. I didn't go to school for that, but my study of plants trumps everything I did in school, which was considerable. I mean, I took school very seriously, but the study of plants was like a whole nother education system for me. It was like 2 more universities that I went to. So there's that. And one of the nice things about plant study is that when you're trying to figure out what plant you're seated before by using a field guide, meaning a book that takes you through the locator key and helps you to understand what plant this is, because you are there stationary and quiet and not moving, you're creating another whole opportunity that could happen to you. While you're doing that, you could look up and a deer could walk right in front of you, or maybe a coyote would show up there who didn't know you were there because you were doing the extraordinary. You were being quiet and unmoving. And for a human, that's rare. Stalking is the other entrance into that. Because, as I said earlier, it places you at center stage of reality, of the real world. The real world is the one that was already out there before we started changing it.
You're talking about building a foundation, I think, for becoming in some ways. And the question that remains in me is, what about the next step? What about this mystery that you are referring to? Just simply doing these things, learning about our places and our plants and animals and spending time in the outdoors, being quiet, being observant. Does that simply increase the chances that we'll encounter mystery as well? Or are there things we can do to deepen that sense?
I'll tell you something that I think is an important ingredient in it. And this is not going to be a popular one to people because people love to do things socially. But to do these things alone is maybe the most important part of it. I've always believed that you encounter your truest self, your truest honesty. I know that sounds redundant, but when you're alone, when you have no one to react for, you're absolutely at ground zero of what you are and how you react to things. Doing these things alone, I believe, can be a boon for you in getting to this relationship. But it seems to me that most people are not inclined to do that. They'd rather call somebody up, hey, let's go out in the woods this day, as if being by yourself is not enough, which is kind of a shame. By being out in the forest with no one else present, I believe you have more capability of peeking into the mystery. Ecology is one thing that is very detailed and set. Those things out there are absolutely true. The way, for example, that an earthworm interacts with an oak tree. I mean, there is a relationship there, and it's all about earthworms tunneling and creating tunnels of air because roots must have air. And without worms, it just wouldn't work. So you've got that profound relationship, but the mystery of it actually might be different for each person. And I like that. I don't want someone to come to my school and learn how to be me because they've got a whole different journey waiting for them. If they just will come and learn how to go through some doors, leave me and go be yourself on that journey of yours. And you may experience the mystery in a completely different way. And I really like that because all people are unique. I'm 78 next month, so there are a lot of things that I can't do anymore. But there was a long, long time of many years where I went on seasonal, what I call survival trips, always by myself. I looked forward to them so much because I knew what their value was just for the alone time.
So I really enjoy solo trips because the performance drops, the language ends. There's no one there but yourself. And I think that great mystery is encountered when we just simply learn how to be, not to do, not to perform, not to speak, not to think, not to try to describe or draw boundaries around, but to just simply be there. I'll take guys out into the woods and I'll have everybody just take their shoes and socks off and just go across the earth barefooted and not speak and just pay attention to what do you feel? What do you see? What do you hear? We live in a world where we are just pounded constantly with information. And I think the stalking, the sitting, the observing, the watching a spider spin its web or watching an ant carry something across the ground is an opportunity to just be instead of doing, to observe. Instead of labeling and attaching and striving, we're just able to stop. And that's the beauty of what Mark teaches. It's the beauty of what his books teach, is be, not do, but be.
Mm-hmm. I wonder, as you do your work, how you maintain your motivation. I do work with folks too to try to help them reestablish relationship with nature, but it's difficult in the face of the profundity of the issues that keep us from that. I mean, you look at the state of the world and environmental degradation and just abuse and environmental injustice, and it can be overwhelming. It's hard to imagine that people could change enough to become unbalanced forces for good in the world in terms of our broader environment. I wonder what keeps you going.
When I was a couple of years out of college, I got a job as a naturalist and environmental educator for the Georgia Conservancy, which is a statewide private organization. And my first work with them was working with adults, trying to get people to change their minds about the environment so that they would care about it. And it was so frustrating to me. I felt like a failure at it because I couldn't get adults to change their minds about things. I remember the day that the assistant director said, "Hey, I just got a phone call from this school and they want somebody to come out and do a program." I remember it was about swamps, of all things. And so I raised my hand and said, "I'll do that." And so I read everything I could about swamps and did a program for them. But that was the beginning of my working with young people. And that gave me hope. I could see the chance there of changing the world with younger people. And so what I had to do was say to myself, okay, I'm going to face that direction and I'm going to work on that. And I'm going to just call that other thing a failure, but I'm not going to keep looking at it. I can't do that. This I can do, and I'm going to do it. And I wish that for everybody. I wish everybody could find something like that. Throw away the guilt about what you can't do and be grateful that this is something I can do.
So, friends, that was teacher and author Mark Warren sharing with Jason, Lyle, and me about his work of helping people to establish and deepen relationship to creation. I put links in the show notes if you're interested in learning more about Medicine Bow Wilderness School or about the many books that Mark has authored. I'll also link to Jason's work with Adventures in Recovery and to his own podcast called Sacred Grit. And if you haven't yet, I highly recommend having a listen to my interview of Jason in episode 132 of the Earth Keepers podcast. Now, I think our conversation in this episode yielded some pretty clear practical applications. So if you're thinking about ways to deepen your own relationship to creation, perhaps you could consider creating a foundation for relationship by doing some book or internet research about the plants in your local ecology. I would recommend that you check out Mark Warren's book series called Secrets of the Forest, in which he offers really accessible head knowledge about ecology, as well as hands-on exercises for applying and exploring such knowledge in the outdoors. Now, in terms of gaining heart knowledge as well as head knowledge, I think we might do well to consider Mark's challenge to spend time alone in the wild. I know that for me to be truly alone, I would need to keep my cell phone turned off and even to leave my dogs behind. As Mark explains, such time could simply mean being still in a single spot, observing and studying a particular plant or other feature of the natural landscape. One thing that intrigued me is this practice of stalking that he talked about. Part of me wants to learn more about it, but mostly I just want to go do it and get a feel for what it's like to move through wild spaces as quietly, slowly, and unobtrusively as possible. Whatever we choose to do to spend time in the wild, just spending that time increases our opportunities to encounter mystery. You know, when you think about it, the more we spend time alone in nature, the more viscerally and deeply we come to understand that we aren't in fact alone, that really we belong to and are part of the kinship network of relatives that is the community of creation. Earthkeepers Podcast is a production of Circlewood, an organization that encourages people to pursue a more ecologically conscious faith. Our executive producer is James Amadon, and our sound engineer is Dave Olfers. Jocelyn Gentry is our communications manager, and Forrest Reed and Levin Poltavsky are the composers of our original music. I am Forrest Inslee, your podcast host, and I'm really grateful for the time you spent listening to this episode. If you would, help us expand our reach by following or subscribing to this podcast on your favorite listening platform. And be sure to go to our website to sign up for a podcast newsletter. If you know someone who would benefit from hearing this podcast conversation, it would be great if you could send them a link. In any case, I hope you'll join us again for our next episode of the Earthkeepers Podcast.